Hi everyone, and welcome to today's MediaWorks masterclass. I think this is potentially a topic that has got the most interest out of everything we've talked about for over the last 6 months. I keep going to meetings where people are asking me about this, all my connections are asking me about this, clients are always asking us about this. I was in Sheffield last week doing a presentation on this, so I'm really looking forward to hearing what we've got to say really about SEO without clicks, so winning in AI-driven search. For those that don't know me, my name's David Norris. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at MediaWorks, and I'm also the host of the MediaWorks Masterclass. Today, I've got my colleagues from the SEO team. So I've got Abby.
Hi, so I'm the Senior SEO Consultant here at MediaWorks. I primarily work on our Tier 1 accounts, and I'm basically responsible for supporting Jack in making sure that everyone within the SEO team is working successfully and our clients are getting the most out of their retainers.
Thanks, Abby. And Jack.
And I'm Jack, the SEO Organic Search Director here at MediaWorks. So head up the SEO function, organic function, from everything from technical to content to DPR.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Abby. So what we're going to cover today then, we've got plenty of slides, plenty of information. I think as we go through, we're going to talk about primarily what's actually changing. So what is changing in this space? I think we all know sort of AI is changing the discovery process and the search process full stop. So I think we're going to look at the data behind AI's impact on search behavior and what it's actually doing to organic traffic. We're then going to look at what still matters. So I think what we're going to dispel is the myth that they are two very discrete things. In essence, there's a massive amount of overlap that I think we're going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about how, as I say, they are not exclusive, mutually exclusive of one another. So we're going to focus on the SEO fundamentals, where they've evolved. And then we're going to talk about how to win visibility when clicks disappear. So we know that clicks are down through organic search, but again, we know that people are still utilizing these platforms as a way of discovering everything that they need to know, really. So I think for me, the first place to start would be really sort of what's changing.
Yeah, so as of 2025, 38% of all desktop users said that they were then using an AI tool to fuel their search. As of 2026, so just a few months later, this is now sitting just under 50%. So the pace of growth is actually like unprecedented with these AI tools. As we'll get into, this isn't necessarily taking away from search, but it is really fueling that search, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So here we can see a massive stat about how search is just still massive. 5 trillion searches are happening on just Google alone once a year. That's 5 trillion searches of kind of curiosity, of intent. It's discovering your brand, things about your products. And search ultimately still does remain the fundamental of how your brand is discovered.
I think as well, one of the things that I read about recently was about 15%, and it's a statistic that's held for like 10, 15 years. About 15% of all searches that happen in Google are unique, right? So it's like there's new terminology, new words, new mixture, new combinations of keywords. So I think as well, like the numbers are just incredible when you think of it, aren't they? And again, I think when we get onto this slide, it's interesting, isn't it, to consider sort of the global market share and the power base that is Google.
Yeah, 100%. So Google still controls over 90% of the entire global market within search. So still an absolutely dominant force. I know that when ChatGPT was first launched, like the conversations we were having with clients is, well, do we need to even optimize towards Google anymore? Is it now going to be just ChatGPT? But actually, we can still see that most of search is still happening within like Google's own domain.
And I guess then that nicely leads us on to talk about what is going on then in that LLM landscape. You know, I think as a user, my behavior has definitely changed, and I think sort of I'm now crossing multiple platforms to do the same sorts of things, and again, trial and error in certain things and seeing what the results I get as well. So there's a bit of test and learn taking place.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, again, fundamentally, that search is still happening on Google. Definitely, that isn't going away. But with like new AI tools like the likes of ChatGPT, we've got Claude, which is becoming even more popular now. Perplexity, it's kind of reshaping discovery at the moment. So they're not these like traditional search engines where you put in one thing and you get these these traditional 10 blue links, but instead you can have a conversation, you can get feedback from your answer, you can cater it to you, you can ask questions about it, you can question it, and it becomes a much more informed level of searching and education.
And that deeper sort of search is what's happening, isn't it? It sort of has become that more conversational approach.
Yeah.
You know, I won't even get into the world of saying please and thank yous in searches, but I think for me it's like, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's almost like you are making a query into a platform, and then what you are then going to do is you are then refining that query as
Yeah.
you go through. And I feel like I'm almost filtering and synthesizing information as I go.
Yeah, well, we touch on it later in this presentation, but I think it just means that when users are ultimately landing on your site, they are so much more educated than they ever were before. You know, originally you would start out with query 1 in Google. You would go through lots of different websites to find the information you would want. You would go through multiple pages within your own domain to get that information. Whereas now you can do all of that within these platforms here and more. So, you know, we are going to see, I think the next slide does demonstrate it, but we are going to see lots of searches now happening off your site. We're not going to see that traffic as a key indicator anymore. But ultimately, when a user still lands on your site, they are really high intent, they're really well educated, and they're coming to you for that transaction rather than the education. So this slide here goes into it. So we can see that traditional searches via Google, Bing, etc., they're not dropping. This is data from like January 2023. It stayed consistent since then, but we can see that the rate of AI tool visits is increasing month on month, and is increased still. This is only up until summer of 25, but this is increased now still to just over 50%. So you can see here that the trend is showing that actually AI data is fueling these searches. Yeah. So when people get onto your site, they have all of this bank of information about why you're the best, which is why it's now so important to make sure that your search engine optimization is actually AEO as well.
Yeah, and I think when we think about sort of the Google play in this space as well, I think they've got a massive role, haven't they, in terms of driving this behaviour and mass adoption. Because, again, a lot of people are saying to me, just general people really, are having conversations around, so what is that thing at the top? Like, what is that AI mode thing? And then they're asking me about, like, what are AI overviews? And I think that they've definitely, obviously we know that there's already a user base in Google operating in that space where they're very good at Googling stuff and Googling it, right? But then also Google's taken us on a bit of that journey, haven't they, in terms of where AI overviews, for example, appear and how often they appear. You know, I think back to January 2025, and I think they were appearing in about 5% of all searches. Yeah. That's now way higher statistic. I know we touch on that as we go through the day, but I think it's really interesting, isn't it? It's just how that combination approach is really playing off. And I think that people who were thinking, as I said at the beginning, of these as binary thing, it doesn't quite work like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess when it comes to Google, then what are sort of the main ways that they're rolling this out?
So there's 4 kind of different platforms that we are now seeing that are happening off your site. So AI overviews, you can't agree or disagree with whether you see this or not. Whether if you type in a prompt, it will normally come up for you now. I can't remember the stat off the top of my head, but I think it's around 90% of all queries now have an AI overview appear. So the likelihood of your users seeing it, the traffic you're trying to attract, seeing it is greatly increased. It's worth noting with that, they are primarily like informational searches, which is why we say that the traffic now coming to your site is so educated, because that information that you're putting on your site is actually now appearing in the AI overview for that keyword that you might have generally optimized for. AI mode is Google owned, so it's a chat experience within Google. It's something that you do have to physically opt in for. You have to click on it. You have to engage with it. It's very similar to ChatGPT. It's that extension of search, so you can have a conversation with it. You can question it. You can ask for more detail. And then Gemini, other LLMs, so like again ChatGPT, Perplexity, kind of a step above that. Gemini is obviously Google owned, but is again that it doesn't sit within like the Google space. So you don't click on it the same way that you click onto like images or shopping. You go onto it separately, but it's again very conversational. And then web guide is something that was launched last year. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Last year. It's still in beta mode at the moment, and it's only in the US. But what it's now producing for users is like full guides. So traditionally, when you're creating informational content, if you're like a travel company, for example, you probably wrote a guide for, you know, stop places in Spain, and you would write a whole piece around that. So whereas web guide is going to be a direct competitor for that information, because as you put in a prompt, it gives you a whole guide to read through.
Yeah.
So it's going to be really interesting to see the effects of that as that now rolls into the UK.
And we don't know,
Yeah.
do we? Do you know what I mean? Like, we don't know as to when all of these are going to be rolled out, how they're going to be rolled out. I think there's conversations about AI mode was going to become the default search functionality. I think there's conversations around that. I say web guide is US only at the moment. We don't know when it's coming to the UK. So I think it's very much an evolving landscape. But I guess we've alluded to this as we've gone through, Abby. I think like the click impact. So what is the data actually showing? Because I guess there's lots of people listening, watching, who are thinking to themselves, what is going on with my organic search traffic right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can see kind of on the right hand side there, we're seeing a massive drop in click-through rate at the moment. Again, this is because generally speaking, the users that are searching for information are getting it from the AI overview. They don't need to click on to domains anymore to get that information. They can see it, it's straightforward, it's clear, and then they can bounce straight back off. If they're not getting it from the AI overview, they might be using another platform, as we said, like AI mode or another form of kind of LLM. So we need to really be quite clever about how we feed information into these platforms, because ideally we still want our brand to be cited first. We still want to be as visible as we can across all of these spaces. And I think we just need to be aware of how traffic is probably not going to be the metric of success anymore. It's going to be visibility. And I think we'll go on to that, you know, in the next few slides.
So that's quite startling, I guess, in lots of ways, isn't it? It's quite stark if you're thinking about where we've been in organic search and how it's actually moved. And look, as we all know, sort of organic search definitely still has a massive role to play. But I think it's about thinking about sort of then what does actually still matter in this space. So how are we going to actually do activity that supports our organic search activity whilst also thinking about how it supports our EO/GEO sort of activity. And I guess then it's focused really on those three core pillars, Jack.
Yeah, no, exactly that. So I think it's an exciting approach, but not much changes in the sense of, you know, technical is still very much important, you know, the very basis that Googlebot, LLMs, any kind of crawler can see the website, parse the website, ingest the data and actually return it. Similarly, content, I think, you know, there's a few nuances there, but again, the main kind of approaches remain the same in terms of EEAT, authority and trust being the massive one at the moment in terms of, again, we do go into it, but you know, having citations and having some sort of authority behind what you're writing, and whether that be the brand, the person, all that kind of thing. And then authority, again, whether it's offsite or on-site, but again, thinking about links, citations, whether that's in publications, press releases, even kind of, not, I don't want to say directories, but certain kind of website listing, hosting kind of sites, which obviously points towards trust signals. So things haven't changed. Of course, there's some nuance, but those three core pillars, which always were, still are.
Yeah, and I think sort of then for us, it's like, what does the data actually show about sort of LLM behaviour? And I guess one of our clients, British Business Bank, really good example of you know, big organisation, big domain authority, sort of does amazing stuff across the UK finance landscape. I think like, but the results are really interesting, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly that. And I think this is kind of ties into what we just talked about there in terms of really content and authority. So we analysed about 1,000 prompts across the British Business Bank, and effectively saw these kind of three main stats. So the one on the left talks about actually how frequently content is taken off a page. So we saw up to 14 times an LLM will literally take content from a single source and put it into different prompts. So that's obviously massively different from when we used to create a cluster of keywords, target a single page, and that would then return for those keywords. So obviously it's really generating these results from this kind of content, which then leads us into more into like a creating content for sections and kind of paragraphs type of thing, because again, that paragraph's going to get returned X amount of times. Interestingly, in the middle, again to that authority point, Wikipedia, we all know, how authoritative it is and how much it ranks and, where it is in search. But again, we can see that it's actually returned 1.4 times more than a homepage of a brand. So again, directionally pointing at us that, these authoritative sites that have always been authoritative still play a massive part in that kind of trust element and that kind of confidence that LLMs, AI has in your site and what you offer. And then the last piece was, again, kind of tied in with that first point, is that across 1,000 searches, British Business Bank appear nearly 4,000 times. So again, we aren't talking kind of, we're all going for this top position anymore.
Yeah.
There's so many different sections of content in these answers being generated that there's value in multiple places, which I think is, again, we'll always talk about becoming on page one being, good, then position one being the gold standard of where we want to be. But actually, things are a bit more nuanced now. And again, there's just a lot of different battleground to kind of fight on, I guess.
And I guess that then leads us into sort of some of the new rules. So SEO in the GEO and AI era has changed somewhat. As we said, it's not a wholesale change. Do you know what I mean? Like people who traditionally perform well in things like SEO, it's people who perform in now quite well in AEO and GEO. But again, there's lessons to be learned, isn't there?
Yeah, 100%. And I think this is where you can get, I guess, rub people up the wrong way, and every SEO person will have a different opinion. But I guess my opinion, I think shared by, our approach at MediaWorks is we are using SEO and GEO, AEO as different terms. And I think this slide does hopefully do a good job of why we want to do that. And actually, by naming it something different, it isn't just about semantics and us trying to sell a new thing. Well, actually, potentially SEO is trying to do something different than AEO and GEO. And up here, what we're talking about is that. So traditional SEO is those blue links, effectively. We measure clicks, measure conversions, we measure kind of zero-click searches, that kind of thing, but very much search focused and really always trying to create some sort of commercial impact from a click.
Yep.
Whereas GEO, AEO, again, we'll focus on ranking still, but then talk about mentions, citations. Again, we can go in a little bit more detail in a kind of like the measurement slide, but actually where you're cited versus where you're actually kind of returned. So where your brand may not be linked, but you may sell washing machines and your brand's up there, but there's no link to you.
Yeah.
That's still as valuable as a link to a guide, what it might be.
And I guess one of the things that people are really wrestling with in this space is sort of that whole measurement piece. Do you know what I mean? Like, so we know that measurement has had to change to adapt towards this as well. I think we had a traditional set of measurement metrics, which we've all talked about multiple times from an SEO perspective. But in this new world that we're heading into, measurement definitely has had to change.
Yeah, again, something we've got a few slides on in a second, but it is about, this discovery part where it's rankings, visibility, citations, more around brand metrics, about like sentiment, trust. Again, those are probably more softer signals in the old world and something we may not get too involved in. But as we are seeing it's impacting results, we have to be more open to bringing that data into our own kind of work streams. But of course, the performance metrics remain the same in terms of conversions, lifetime value of customers, lead qualities, that kind of thing. So really it is those input metrics that are having to change. We can actually ascertain the quality of what we're doing.
So I guess we've given people a bit of a whistle-stop tour about where it's been, why all this is really important. I guess we've also talked about sort of what hasn't really changed as part of that process. I think for me, the next step is always about sort of giving people tangible. So I want to finish in the last 10 minutes talking about sort of what people need to do about this. Do you know what I mean? How do we actually, if you're watching, listening, what are you thinking about in terms of you sat there thinking, right, okay, I'm managing my organic search, or we've got, it's a key channel for our organization. I guess for me, we always want to say to people, so what would our advice be? What would our guidance be? Sort of, and when you get into this, I think step one for us would always be around sort of making sure you've undertaken an audit and track AI visibility in your reporting. I think that's really a key point to understand what the baseline is, Abby.
Yeah, 100%. I think it just goes back to those fundamentals, doesn't it? That you can't start kind of any sort of strategy without actually understanding where you are right now. So first step is just to do a big audit of your site, really monitor like where your brand is appearing across different LLMs, across AI overviews. Is it different? Why is it different? Is some types of content getting cited more often than others? Do we need to be producing that type of content because it's going to lead to more conversions? It's just really getting into like the nitty gritty of what is actually being cited and why. So what we can do, as I said, is track citation rates across like all of those different channels, because again, we can very much help you kind of establish where your audience are. We use a tool at MediaWorks called GWI, which surveys, I think it's like almost 1 million people, isn't it? So
More than that, yeah, across
more
Europe,
than that. Huge number of people. So it gives you a really good idea of how your users are actually searching and where they're engaging. So that's the kind of the platforms that you might want to optimize towards. For example, if you're a B2B business, probably more like Copilot rather than ChatGPT, for example. And then again, comparing like AI overview citation to that. So we have a couple of clients now that are doing really well in ranking positions because we've worked with them and we've been able to do that. They're getting really ranked very well in AI overviews because our informational content is set up to do that, but they might not be doing so well on the LLM. So it's just understanding the differences between those, and making sure that that's integrated into regular reporting as well. So don't just do one report, understand it, and then move on. And this is a landscape that's changing all the time, and those numbers are going to change almost, within a few weeks of each other. So just making sure that you really set time aside to get to grips with it.
And I guess that sort of then leads into, which I'm sure is a question that's being asked, is sort of where to start with reporting, because when it comes to actual reporting, there's such an array of tools out there promising different things. Again, how do you actually measure those metrics? And I think for us, sort of, we are utilizing two very specific tools, one internal, one external that we're engaging with. Do you want to talk people through that?
Yeah, of course. So at the moment, we use a combination, as you said, of these two. So MediaWorks DMC is something that we built internally. It takes a load of different data metrics, not just anything about AEO and GEO, but everything from like paid to search to everything else. It's a great tool. It means that we're able to have quite a lot of like bespoke reporting as well, so we can really give our clients what they're actually looking for and not just numbers, which is great. So we can use this to see quite a lot of visibility, again, around citations against which LLMs, AI overviews, different strategies that we've created, and basically whether they're working, which is great. We've just onboarded another tool as well called Peak AI, which has been like pretty fantastic so far, hasn't it? I know that we've trialed quite a few different tools, and this is one that we've had a lot of success with. It gives lots of detail against how you're doing versus competitors. You can customize the prompts. So again, based on your strategy, you can go after what your consumers are actually searching for, how you're getting discovered, has information on like earned authority versus like owned authority. So whether your DPR campaigns are actually successful, whether people are talking about you in the right way. Loads and loads of detail, which again, we're using to now inform our strategy. Now.
Yeah, and I guess that leads us nicely into, I always like this to give something away, I guess, as part of this session for those organizations that are interested to find a bit more. So I think the exclusive sort of offer to people, and we'll drop a link into the chat, so please do sign up, is a free SEO and AI visibility audit. So what we want to be able to do is utilize some of the tools we've just talked about to be able to speak to potential clients, existing clients that we're already probably reporting for, etc. But people who are interested to find out a bit more about what's going on in this space, like what is working, what isn't working for their brand. As I say, we'll look at sort of compare that against competitors, and also look against sort of what the top 10 high value prompts are in the organization. So again, we can get all of that information, but please do sign up by registering, clicking the link in the chat, and what we'll do is we'll play that audit back to you, and one of the team will jump onto a call with you. So as I say, interested, then please do sign up. But then I guess once you've done the audit, I guess step 2 is about ensuring that technical compliance, Jack.
Yeah, I think we're kind of at, and again, I'm kind of running into the slides later, but we're in a new world, existing world type thing. But the existing world of crawlability, indexation, site architecture, is all still extremely important. However, we are seeing this new emerging trend of, things like Google's UCP and the agentic world we're going to be living in soon, and where that might go. But for now, yeah, those basics and those fundamentals of text still remain. And again, there's no real push towards anything else or anything different at this current time.
Yeah, and then we go into restructuring sort of content for citation, which I think is a big point.
Yeah, I think we've said it quite a few times, like internally with clients and on the masterclass as well. But it's now this shift about writing for the passage and not the page. As Jack touched on earlier, you don't just pick a keyword cluster now and say, okay, I want to rank for that thing, so I'm going to write some pages to rank for that thing. But instead, we now need to be thinking about the whole search journey when we write content. So again, if I'm a travel agent and someone is looking for cheap holidays in Europe, and then they nail down a country, and then they nail down a city, and then they say, okay, what do I need to pack, and what's the weather going to be like, and all of these different things, we need to make sure that everything that they go back and forth with their LLM or their search that prompts an AI overview is being cited in our content across our site in general, not just in one guide or one page, which sounds quite scary when you say it like that. But again, we can help you, or it's just about thinking about putting yourself in your customer's shoes. How would they search, and what information we can feed the LLM to get there. With that, just making sure that everything's super clear. You've got like structured question and answer, have a H3 as a question, have it answered in the first sentence, make sure that it's really scannable and readable for the LLMs. Where it's possible to include like original data. If you've got data on your CRM, include it. If you have an expert in-house, include them, name them. And of course, like, strong signals like your schema, your FAQ structure, all of those things as well.
I love that, by the way, writing for a passage, not a page. Love that. I'm going to take that away, Abby. Right. And then Jack, I guess, build authority through earned media. We did a whole earned media sort of masterclass recently. Again, we can share the links to that, but where we focused on everything DPR, but this is still a massive area, right?
100%. And I think, again, no change, but some changes in terms of, always on DPR strategies, getting coverage, getting citations, again, as Abby said, using first-party data, using actual stories, data which, make an informed opinion, conflict or support a viewpoint out there in the world. But I think for me, it's just about delivering value in a DPR campaign and not just another piece of slop that says the same thing 100 other pieces say. But there is that other point around, in LLM tracking and the tools that Abby spoke about earlier, is that we can now see where and what publications are being cited. So although there's always been a partnership piece if you're an e-com brand, getting into listicles and that kind of thing. However, there is now a bit more method behind the madness to say, well, this site's listicles are referenced X amount of times in LLM discussions, therefore having your product there will increase your chances of being there. Yeah. There is that kind of view now, which obviously, again, can get into lots of messy worlds about kind of sponsorships and that kind of thing, but it's worth looking at and again considering if you have that data available to you. I think a big stat that we obviously use a tool called Muckrack, which is a PR tool. Interestingly, 3% of journalists have said that they get a pitch that actually matches their specialism. So 97% of their inbox is not to do with what they do. So it might be like a sports journalist getting something about a homeware brand. And actually, this is only going to get worse with more AI tooling. Yeah. But it is about definitely being specific and being targeted in your offsite activity so you have a greater chance to land coverage.
And I think that is so important because you used the word slop there. We talked about AI slop bizarrely in a recent masterclass where we were saying, like, in a world where it just does become a lot easier to synthesize data into a space, it becomes really easy to then just spam and just produce loads of generic content. But what we do know is that just doesn't work. Like, every metric we're looking at just doesn't work, doesn't rank, doesn't perform particularly well. Google and the likes turn around and go, well, it's just aggregated content that we've seen before. So I think it is all about how do you make sure that you stand out in that space. It's really interesting. And I guess as well, we've got to think about beyond the website.
So that agentic point is, the very harsh reality is that websites may no longer be what we see them as today. Yeah. And we are all interfacing through a ChatGPT, Claude UI interface. And actually, the website is just a repository of information which gets pulled in. And I think interesting, we didn't mention it, but on the content point is that pages may start getting longer now. Now we're writing for passages and not pages, and it's not about targeting a cluster of keywords, but it's just keeping a view on things are changing, and actually a website may not be what it is today in the future. I know that's a very scary thought and very hard to almost visualize, but it's definitely a reality we might be facing.
Yeah, it's definitely something to monitor and consider, isn't it, as you're thinking about what your future strategy is. We're not saying this is the world now, but we are saying it does feel like this is the direction of travel that is going to play out over the next few years at least. So I guess finally then, just closing thoughts. I guess this is a slide we talk about on a regular basis, Jack, in terms of when we're showcasing what the two things are to our clients.
100%. So again, we've got traditional SEO on the left, AEOG on the right. I think the most important thing to say is there's a stream of activity which overlaps, which works in both. And, if you have an in-house team or another agency, really, we feel that's where the focus should be at the moment, living in both worlds and performing in both with a view as well of, supporting the traditional and the future thinking. But like I said, that middle point is the goal at the moment, while keeping an eye probably on the future and ensuring that we are optimizing for both.
And if we were to give people sort of 3 key takeaways, we synthesized, again, we did a bit of AI ourselves, and we broke it down into these real 3 areas, didn't we?
Yeah, so again, from the beginning of the presentation, AI is just layering over the top of what we're doing now. It's not necessarily taking away. Yes, clicks are reducing, but as we see over all of our client base effectively, that conversion, that revenue point isn't following the same trend. So it is supporting it. Fundamentally, SEO is the same. Yes, we are seeing shifts from like rankings to citations to more visibility metrics, but fundamentally, SEO activity should remain. And then really the last point is, we need to welcome this new world. I don't think anyone's ignoring it, but it is actually staying abreast of what's happening and the most latest kind of technology to be able to measure what is happening in the market. Without that, you're just flying blind effectively.
Well, I think that's a really good point to finish on, Jack. I think, again, there's so much out there. Hopefully we've brought a bit of clarity to the conversation. Hopefully we've given people loads of food for thought and some practical takeaway tips. As I say, if you are interested, then do sign up for the audit and we can do a personalised, bespoke bit of research for you there and give you some guidance on your specific setting. But I'd like to just finish by saying thank you very much, Abby. Thank you very much, Jack. And thanks for everybody for joining us for today's MediaWorks Masterclass. Enjoy the rest of your week.